Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another week of a pedagogy of multiliteracies. This week, we're going to be making the shift from culturally relevant to anti-biased and anti-racist teaching. So I'm going to begin this week's voice thread directly onto the concepts of funds of knowledge. And I'm using this analogy of money. When we talk about money and investment, a fund is a place, it's an account where you put your money and it grows over time. And I like this idea of having funds of knowledge that are growing over time with all these things that we put into it. So what exactly are the things that are we putting into it and that are growing over time? Our funds of knowledge are the historical accumulation of abilities, bodies of knowledge, assets, and cultural ways of interacting. That's why we call it a fund. It's a fund of knowledge because it accumulates over time, and it's not only ours, but it is not only of an individual, but it is of a collective. So it has to be to do with academic and personal background knowledge, accumulated life experiences, skills and knowledge that we use to navigate everyday social contexts, and worldviews structured by broader, historically and politically influenced social forces. So all this encompasses the idea of the funds of knowledge. So if we go back to that analogy of the financial resources, the financial funds, when you put money into a fund, you have those elements there to help you in any given situation or to use it in any given situation. So if you want to engage your students, if we take the analogy to the funds of knowledge, if you want to engage your students, you have these resources there that can help you achieve that. If you want to increase your student learning or your student achievement, you have these resources there. So also Gloria Ladson-Billings calls it a vehicle. We'll talk a little bit about it later. So this vehicle, these resources that you have there, that are your students' funds of knowledge, you can use them in your classroom. And what are these elements that you can use to engage your students? It can be connections to the home language, to family values and traditions, caregiving, friends and family outings, household chores, educational activities, favorite TV shows, family occupations, and scientific knowledge. So can you think of any other elements that are part of the student's culture or of the student's funds of knowledge that you can bring into your classroom as a teaching aid, or to get involved in your curriculum with that culture? If you can think of any other, you can comment it in this part of the voice thread. So at this point, I want to connect these concepts of the funds of knowledge with literacy identity. This graph right here is by Anstey and Ball, and it it shows where literacy identity is located. First, it is located within the more broad life world. There is a life world that corresponds to all social and cultural experiences, and that is where us and our students are living in. And then there is a school-based world that includes all pedagogical activities, everything that happens into the school and are part of that smaller school community. And all those things are part of the curriculum and frame what we call literacy identity. Now, literacy identity is part of those funds that help us understand texts, because the way that we understand text and the way that we read these texts has to do with all these elements, the life world and the school-based world. And we interpret the text based on our prior experience with them, based on our knowledge about them, based on the social and cultural knowledge that we have about it, and about the technological knowledge and experiences that we have. So this is what shapes our literacy identity, and this is why it's important to embed these concepts within the fonts of knowledge, because the way that we understand things, the way that we perceive text, is dictated by how um, by our identity, and by how it is dictated by the social norms. And we'll be exposed to it a little bit more when we complete an activity related to your own identity. And it's going to be part of our Synced Ed talk this week. But I wanted to put it here so you can tie it together, because another activity that we're going to be doing is about connecting all these concepts. So now let's move on to culturally relevant teaching. And you already read about it in the Gloria Ladson-Billings reading that we had for this week. So what is it that we call culturally relevant teaching? And I found this meme online and thought it was really funny, because for me, that my experience with, for example, with culturally relevant teaching before I read all this literature, I saw in schools, in my daughter's school, for example, there's a multicultural day where everybody brings their food and you share them, but there's not much else. There's not much discussion really about the culture, or where where we all come from, and what brought us here. And so for me, um, it was like marking a checkbox in a checklist. Oh, we did a multicultural day, so we're good with that. Um, but that's why I really liked when I saw this meme, because it kind of reflected my thinking. If you could stop having a fiesta and calling it culturally responsive teaching, that'd be great. So sometimes this is how we see in schools covering that culturally relevant teaching. But as you saw in the Gloria Ladson-Billings reading, there are three very important elements to culturally relevant teaching that go way beyond just throwing a fiesta in your classroom. So um, this comes from that reading. Educators traditionally have attempted to insert culture into the education instead of inserting education into the culture. And I want you to, at this point, reflect about this quote, and make a comment in the voice thread about what does it mean to insert culture into education instead of inserting education into the culture. What is the difference between the two? And here's another quote. Culturally relevant teachers utilize students' culture as a vehicle for learning. And this is where it connects to the fonts of knowledge concept, because the fonts of knowledge are those elements and those resources that we have for our students' learning, to improve our students' learning. So equating these fonts to a vehicle and maybe seeing it under a different light, it's not just elements that I need to include because it's just extra curriculum. No, it's the vehicle through which your students are going to improve their learning, and they are going to be creating critical consciousness, and they are going to be achieving all the curriculum goals through culture, not as an additional thing, not as an extra thing, not as as a multicultural day. More on multicultural days to come. So there are multiple ways of doing these things wrong, of using our students' cultures as a vehicle. Um, and some of those ways is tokenizing students' cultures to connect with them. You're trying to connect with your students and you end up tokenizing. Tokenizing is that idea of doing something just, just for the sake of it, just because I am required to do it. So, and I want everybody to see that I'm doing it. Um, Connecting it to the multicultural day things, and also we risk culturally appropriating when we are trying to connect with students and we try to use elements of their culture. We risk misrepresenting them. So because it's hard to do these things and do it correctly, we're going to be discussing what exactly or how we can approach to that. But before we start discussing, I want you to watch these professionals. They are Yaritza Villalba, Dee Lanier, and Ken Shelton, and they discuss these issues. They are school teachers, and they are U.S. based, and during all these waves in 2020, where they are, where schools in the U.S. confronted all these racial issues, they have been really advocate about it, about creating a more culturally relevant space, and about moving towards anti-biased and anti-racist teaching. So I want you to hear from them, because the ideas that they convey there, I would never have those kind of words and that eloquence they have to express these issues. So I want you to watch it from them. I'm going to include the link in the voice thread so you can go watch it. Of course, you're invited to watch the whole thing. It's about an hour, but if you don't have that kind of time, as I know you don't, you please only watch it from the minute 7:50 to minute 13:40. That's where they ask them the question how to integrate um, culture in their classrooms. So after you watch that video, come back to the voice thread. So after discussing, like they said, what not to do, they also gave some tips on what to actually do. Ken talks about getting to know your own ethnicity, your own background, and a lot of the literature out there says that that is the first step. Um, Also, this article that I'm linking here um, has these 5 steps to a more culturally inclusive classroom. And so the first one is to get to know yourself, get to know your culture, your biases. Um, we talked a little bit about it last week when I showed you the link to the implicit bias test. And I encourage you to do some of them just to get to know a little bit about your bias. Doing these exercises has been really enriching for me, and I'm sure that it will be as well for you. And the other step is, of course, get to know your student. In in the in the video that you just watched, they discuss creating a relationship with your students. That's how you get to know them, and that's how you get to know their culture and inviting them into your curriculum. That would be the next step. Adapt your teaching and your curriculum. We also discussed in previous weeks, we have been talking about this topic of curriculum negotiation. That's how you do it. You invite your teachers, your students. You invite your students to adapt your teaching, adapt your curriculum so it's more relevant for them. And you elevate the students' culture and their native language. When you let them participate in deciding what the curriculum is gonna be, they will bring aspects of their culture, they will bring aspects of their language that you want you really want to have those pieces to be part of your classroom if you are to be a successful anti-bias and anti-racist educator. And the other one is to involve family and community. You saw some of that also in the reading this week. Ladson Billings talk about that involvement of the teachers in the community and how those were really successful teachers. Okay, so these are some ideas, and we're gonna get started with that first step. And that's what we're gonna cover this week. So we will start doing the groundwork towards anti-biased and anti-racist teaching with a little exercise called a personal history of otherness. And you're gonna find all the details about it in the OWL course site, and we're gonna do it I'm going to give you time to do it during your Saint Ed talk this week, but you can start working on it prior to the Saint Ed talk because for some of you, you will want to reflect a little bit more on that. So you will have all the instructions for that separately, and so we can, when we get into the Saint Ed talk, we can start working on it right away. So this activity was designed by Jeffrey Hill. I had the privilege of learning from him this summer in some workshops that I took. I also learned from Ken Shelton and Dee Lanier, which you just heard from them in the video that I just shared with you. And this is one of many very interesting activities that Jeffrey has in his website. So I'm putting the link to share those things with you so you can just check them out. Maybe you want to use some of them for yourselves or for your students. So this week we will do some collaborative mind maps to help us connect all the concepts that we have seen this week, and we will do that during our Sync Ed talk on Thursday, November 19th from 10:30 to 12:30 a.m. Besides doing those mind maps, we will also work on that personal history of otherness that I talked to you about. We'll start with that actually, and I'll give you some times to finish the activity. If you want to spend more time on that, you will have the activity available on OWL, and then we will do these collaborative mind maps, which will be the activity for this week in our Synced Ed talk. Well, thank you so much again for listening to me week after week. I am truly enjoying reading all your participations in VoiceThread, in Perusal, and we're almost halfway to the course. And I just wanted to say again how much I appreciate all the work you do. Thanks so much. See you around. Bye bye.